Welcome to Part 3 in a comprehensive guide to setting up Accudemia. Today we're going to be covering configuring your center walk-ins. Start off with going into the general settings. To get there, we're going to go to Menu, Administration, Control Panel. Under Tracking Settings, we're going to click on General. We're going to go ahead and select our center and view settings. In here, we're going to get some options on general things that we can configure for the center. One would be if we are offering a waiting line, how the tutors show up in that waiting line. You can have them only show who's signed in. You can show everyone if you're only using this in a single center, or you can use the schedule information. So this is up to you, however you want to do that. Using the schedule information takes into consideration what services and courses that they're available for on their schedule. So some people prefer that, whereas the show only signed in, those are all the ones that are available. They clicked on their name, and as a tutor I have an option where I could sign into the system. Down here we also have some things like an auto sign out feature. So for instance, when the student reaches a set number of minutes, let's say the center's only open for 8 hours, and really the student is not going to stay that long. So I could go ahead and put in the number of minutes in this block. So let's say 720 minutes should be the maximum. When that happens, it will just automatically sign them out at that time. I do have some other options here. Let's say when they reach that, I could have a warning that posts the next time they sign in. Something simple like, please remember to sign out. And if I would like to, I could actually give them a default duration, meaning a certain number of times. So let's say they, on average, students stay about an hour. So I could go ahead and give them an hour instead of signing them out and giving them the full time that I have up here. I also have the option to choose whether or not to show the student's name when they're signing in and out of the center. Some people prefer that it's hidden and it just says the time or how long that they stayed and not their name. Others are okay with the names being there. So either way you go, that's one thing to consider. We're going to go ahead and save those changes, and we're not going to actually see those until later on. The next thing that we want to consider are the walk-ins. These would be how a student, if they don't have an appointment scheduled with you, what they're going to be presented with in the center. So in here, the first section we have is the selection path. This is a somewhat new feature that we're offering, where if they pick a certain service, you can have different options set up for them depending on the service that they picked. This will make sense once we get to that screen. So I'm going to check that and do configure selection path. Up here, I'd check this first option off if I am going to use it, and you can see that the first box is always set to the service, because all of these are based on the service that they select and what options that we're going to have up here. So my default selection path is just what this would normally follow if I didn't have anything defined. So they're going to pick a service, in this instance a course or subject area, their instructor for that course, and then finally a tutor. Now this may be different depending on what we have available for the student. So you can see when I scroll down further, I have computer use, online tutoring, and walk-in tutoring. So for most of those, they're going to use the default, but for like computer use, I'm probably going to just not have them select anything after that. So I just select the step 2 drop down and set that to none. Now if these don't change to none automatically, I can also set the third and fourth steps to none as well. With these other ones I can leave them the default, or I could do something different if I wanted one of these to be different than the other. So instead of, maybe for my walk-in tutors, I let the tutors select the student, so I don't really need them to pick a tutor, so I could say none on that option. For online tutoring though, we may want them to pick the tutor so we know who they want to meet with. And this is just, my sample data, so for now I'm going to save it like that. Now we didn't go through all the walk-in settings, that was just the first option there. And I'm going to go ahead and select that center again when I go back in. Our other options that we have are, if I don't use the selection path, then all four of these options, services, subject areas, instructors, tutors, could be something that I show to the students, and they would all appear, one right after the other, but they would have to pick everything based on what I have set in these settings. Now, because we're using the selection path, these will work a little different. So we're going to think, if this is displayed to the student, what would I want them to see? Now, if I didn't use that option, then these will actually apply as they're stated here. So that might not make sense, but let's look at it. So we go to look at services, and the selection option we have is optional. Now, most people are going to make this required because these are all the services that you came up with. So you should have something available for services. And since we were using the selection path, we're going to make that required, so they have to pick a service so we know what other options are available. I do have, other than making it optional where they'll get a none, I do have do not show if this was something I didn't want to display. Maybe we know that the same service is being applied for all the students, so maybe I don't show that and I just have them pick a tutor. I don't know what other options, but you could do something like that. Now, with this default option, this is if I have a particular service that is used more than anything else in the center. I could have it default to that being pre-selected, but in this case I'm not going to do that. So next we're going to go down to subject areas. Subject areas, this is the course or subject that the student's going to be selecting from, and based on that, those are the tutors that are available for helping with that course. So we have the same selection option here. You can make it required, optional, or do not show. I'm going to make this required because if I do have them selecting it based on those selection paths that we have set, I'm going to definitely want them to pick a subject area, and we should have all that information loaded in the system before we set this up. With this same thing, I can actually pick a particular course that maybe if we have more than anything else in the system, I may want to go ahead and make that as the default. Now, in my case, I'm not going to do that. I'd rather the student actually pick their course that they want help with. This last option, I can choose to use student enrollment. If I'm uploading the student enrollment, this is definitely something very handy to have. This stops the student from seeing like every course that's been uploaded in the system and just displays the ones that they have been registered or enrolled in. Moving along, in the instructors options, I can do the same thing. I can make this required, optional, or do not show. Now for this one, a lot of schools may want to make this optional just because they may not have the instructor associated with the course yet, depending on the way that the registration system works. You don't want to create a point where the student can't go any further in their selection process. So for this one, we may want to make that optional. And then this is sort of similar to the enrollment that we were looking at the student. This also would use the instructor that is registered as the instructor or the faculty member for that course. So if I check that, they should only see their one instructor. Finally, we get down to the last option that can be displayed, which is the tutors. In this section, I can choose to make that a requirement, optional, or do not show. Depending on the way we have it set up for my center, this may be something that I don't want to show, but in our case I want to make this required because I'm using those selection paths, and if I do ask them for the tutor selection, I want them to actually pick one of my available tutors. Now we go to the availability for your tutors. If I'm using it in a single center environment, I can use the show everyone. This is going to show everyone regardless of what the tutor can help with, or if they're available on their schedule. And that takes us to the other options. So if I use tutor assignments, this is only going to display the tutors that are assigned the courses selected. And then this third option, use the schedule information, this is going to show all the tutors that not only can help with the course, but also are scheduled to be in at this time. So a lot of times this is the best option, so that depending on the service that was selected and the course, this is the tutor that would be available for that. The second last option I have here is the display at. Now this doesn't apply if I was using the selection paths like I did up above, but if you were not using that, I could choose to display the tutor selection at sign in, sign out, or both. So this last option, if they can't pick the tutor up front because they don't know, they're actually going to have an unknown option, and then if they select that, it will ask them at sign out who they met with. So in our case, none of these options are really going to be applicable, so I could leave it set to anything. But if I had where they were picking the same options regardless of the service, this would come into play. Now, since we are using their schedule up here, you do want to actually give the students some leeway here, and you could have the tutors show up a few minutes before their start time. So in my case, I wanted them to be able to see them about 15 minutes before they actually start. Just in case a student's a little early, they'll still see that tutor as someone that's available to select. This takes us to guest sign-ins. Now, guest sign-ins are basically students that do not exist in the system, or someone who doesn't have an ID that you may allow to sign into the software. Now, for this to work, you do have to have some things like global courses or services that are available for these guests, where they wouldn't necessarily have to be registered to them or not use the registration options that we looked at above. Also, with the guest sign-in, because they don't have an ID, if I was to enable this, they're automatically given a sign-out time for the amount of minutes that you place in this box. So in this case, if I were to enable this, they would get 60 minutes, and it would show up in the logs with this ID. So I could make this, maybe something close to my center's name instead. So maybe something like tutor-guest. Now, I'm not going to enable this because we don't really offer any services to students that aren't registered. So I'm going to just skip this for now. The final option in the walk-ins is to require a confirmation before signing in. When the students sign in, they're basically asked all those options. Once they have it selected, if I don't ask them for this confirmation, then they're immediately signed in once they select all those options. This simply displays a quick pop-up just to confirm that everything that they selected was correct. I do like that option, so I'm going to leave it. Now, I can scroll up to the top and save, or click the bottom right arrow to go right back up to the top and save those changes. Now that we've got the general and walk-in settings configured, we need to set up a sign-in station so that we can test a student walk-in. To do that, we're going to go to the menu, Administration, Sign-in Station, Computers. This can also be accessed a little bit quicker under the new Quick Menu Sign-in Station option. Once you get there, you're going to select a center. Once I have the center selected, I'm going to go ahead and click the Setup Kiosk and log out. If I choose to do that, it'll log me out of Accudemia, and we can test the sign-in kiosk. As well, for admins, we have an option where you can test the sign-in station without having to log out. While you're configuring, this is going to be really helpful. To test the sign-in process, I'm going to type in the student's ID and hit go. Now we see the available services. We're going to select walk-in tutoring in this example. All the courses that this student is registered to, as we set in the settings, are going to show up. Now I'm going to go ahead and select Intro to Mathematics. Next, we're going to select our instructor. And finally, we're going to just confirm that everything we selected is good. Now that the student signed in, we can close out of the sign-in station, view center attendance, manage center, and we can see that the student is signed in and ready for instruction. Now that we've seen how you can do this through a normal walk-in station, we're going to go ahead and test that in a virtual environment. Using the menu, we're going to go back to Administration, Control Panel, and we're going to select Virtual Sessions. Once I have that selected, we're going to go to the Tutoring Center and View Settings. We're going to click on the left side, the Remote Sign-In links, and here's where we would enable the virtual session options for administrators, or if I would like my tutors to be able to create these remote sign-in links as well, I can check that off. Click the arrow to go back up to the top and save those changes. Once I've done that, I should now on the menu under Center Attendance have Virtual Sign-In option. Now we're going to go ahead and create a link for this. Once we do that, it's going to ask us which center we're trying to set up a remote sign-in station for. These remote sign-in stations will basically have a link that allows students to sign in remotely without the need to actually be coming into the center physically. When we get started, the first thing is the instruction to the student before they sign in. So we can say something like, please enter your ID and select the options available. Once we've entered a message there, we can choose to fix this to a particular service, subject area, tutor, or instructor. That would basically pre-select those options so that this link would be uniquely for that service, subject area, tutor, or instructor. In this case, we want to leave it open so that they still have all the options that they would normally have on a sign-in station. The last option here is once the student is signed in, you can give them instructions to join the actual session that the tutor is having. So in here we're going to just type in some information. Once I have that message typed, now we're going to put in a URL. Now this could be for any meeting software that provides a link. If you have Zoom, GoToMeeting, Join Me, whatever the link may be, you're just going to go ahead and type that in. So this is going to be the meeting room or the lobby where all the tutors will see the students and they can then take them into their own breakout rooms. Once you have that set, you can choose to have them join the session and not enter a waiting line if you check this box. We can also set a number of days for expiration. In my case, I'm going to just have this as a permanent thing, so I'm going to just say never expires, and I'm going to create the session link. So now I can copy this link and I can share this with my students on my website or wherever I'd like them to be able to access it virtually. We could even send this in an email communication, however you want to let your students know that they could sign into the center remotely. So if I open a new incognito window and paste this link in here, it's going to ask them to sign in. So this does require that the student signs in so that we know who they are. Typically at a normal sign-in station, you're not going to have the students do that because this is going to be on your campus. But because they are accessing this remotely, we do need to know who that student is. They will have had to have a password set up beforehand. You could provide a link so that they could reset their password using the same link that's on the Forgot Your Password here. Once they log in, you'll see that they're already signed in from our previous sign-in from the physical sign-in station. This would normally have a screen where they could sign in, but since they're already signed in, we're going to just sign them out. So we'll click this here, and then once it's clicked, they'll be signed out. And now that they're signed out, if we go look back at the screen, we should see that they have recently signed out. That takes us through the end of setting up our center walk-ins. I'd like to thank you for watching this one, and we'll see you next time in our next part of our comprehensive guide to setting up Accudemia.